This is BYU Sports Nation, brought to you by the BYU Store, simulcast on BYU TV and BYU Radio. Now from Studio B, your hosts, Jarom Jordan and Jason Shepard.
BYU Sports Nation is live, your day-to-day play-by-play in Studio B, presented by the BYU Store, official outfitter of BYU fans everywhere. It is Monday, October 18th, 2021. Thanks for being here. Shep, did you survive the crazy weekend in college football?
I did. There were a lot of, let's just say, interesting things happening at college football games throughout.
Oh, my gosh.
What in the world was that a golf ball?
What is this, Tennessee?
What? We got Vol fans in here with the crew?
That's a golf ball.
Are you kidding me? Did you see that?
Ball.
Did you see that, by the way?
Where did it come from?
I don't know. Is that a Titleist? Look at
What
this.
in the world?
Look, there's only two people that understand what just happened. Myself and Lane Kiffin. We're the only two that can relate to this.
Only those two.
How crazy was that?
Are you okay?
I am
Didn't
okay.
Hit you in the face?
No, it did not.
Is that our crew? Like, did some Ute fans get in? What just happened? Some Tennessee fans?
How crazy is that?
That was crazy.
That was nuts.
Who's like, I have something to throw. Hold on. Golf ball.
Yeah. Who just randomly carries golf
See,
balls?
BYU fans would throw tortillas on the field. You know what I mean? In celebration of a touchdown.
Well, throw Cougar tails.
Messy.
Maybe
With
some
the maple.
Cougar, maybe some Cougar Crunch.
Some Cougar Crunch. Oh my gosh, that's
that was pretty crazy and universally just taken.
Oh, as we replay this, boom, just right in the shoulder blade. Excuse me, the collarbone. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we have workman's comp here. Is that the thing?
Yeah, formal complaint. Here we go. Boom. Yeah, right on that left.
All right, let's do it one more time. I didn't get to see it. Let's see it one more time.
Everyone else saw it like two or three times.
I know. I want to see it one more time.
Here it is. One more time.
Okay, here it is. Here it is.
Ooh, poof. And then the reaction.
That really did hit on the collarbone, like right on the collarbone.
Okay, we're gonna break some other stuff on the show. Collarbones. Who knows? News. Opinions.
News. Who knows?
Here's your show lineup. What happened against Baylor? What happened?
Oh, we lost. Didn't you see the game?
And what's still, on YouTube TV on the road. And what's still possible for BYU this season. ESPN's Trevor Matich helps us answer those questions and more. Jason Shepard's get shafted again. We'll tell you how.
Wow.
We play Overreaction, Underreaction. And Elijah Bryant has a new team in the Euro League after being let go by the Bucks. But first, some headlines.
Apparently, since Jarom didn't see this, I'll update him on what happened.
No, I saw it. I watched it on YouTube TV.
You and I both YouTube TV subscribers.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's right. BYU loses to Baylor on the road. Final score 38-24. Cougars now dropping their second game in a row after the 5-0 start. After the game, quarterback Jaron Hall said this loss hurts, but it's all about how BYU responds after this.
It's got to be tough, man. Rely on each other. Yeah, it's going to hurt a little bit on the plane. It's going to hurt and through the weekend, but it's just part of the game. Understanding that failure happens, and it's about how you respond for that failure that'll really make who you are as an individual.
As you would expect, BYU falls out of the AP Top 25. ESPN has announced, by the way. It's always fun when we get the game times for these games. And this is a big one with Bronco Mendenhall coming back.
Bronco Bowl, Jason.
It is the Bronco Bowl, yes. ESPN has announced that the Virginia game on October 30th will be a 10:15 Eastern kickoff on ESPN2.
So when you're not in the top 15, you go back to...
It's like so many afternoon games,
kicks.
and now you're relegated back to late night.
BYU plays at Washington State Saturday, but perhaps without head coach Nick Rolovich, who has not been vaccinated for COVID-19 and is waiting to find out the results of a religious accommodation request. The state of Washington mandates all employees be vaccinated or have an exemption. Request approved by today to continue employment. So we'll see what happens to that situation.
Cougars in the National Football League. Michael Davis and the Chargers losing to the Ravens. Davis with 5 tackles in the 34-6 loss to Baltimore. Kyle Van Noy had 4 tackles in a 35-29 loss to the Dallas Cowboys.
Crazy
an extremely entertaining game.
Brother Kellen Moore calling the plays there.
That's right. Daniel Sorensen had a solo tackle in a Chiefs win at Washington. Hey, we're back on the winning track. Jamal Williams rushed for 11 yards in a Lions loss to Spencer's Cincinnati Bengals. And the Jets, 49ers, and Saints were all on byes, so nothing from Zach Wilson, Fred Warner, or Taysom Hill.
Number 8, women's volleyball beats number 24 Pepperdine in 4 sets Saturday. The Cougs are 18-1 on an 11-match win streak. How about that? Massive game Friday against number 22 San Diego. the rival in league, 9 Eastern on BYU TV Friday night. We'll see what both are ranked after updated rankings come out today.
Women's soccer beat Pacific 6-1
There they
to
go
improve
again.
another 6-goal performance. They are now 4-0 in WCC play. The Cougars 2 games this week. They will visit San Francisco Wednesday night before coming back to South Field on Saturday to host LMU.
Man, they just scored a ton of goals. It's like ridiculous run.
5 of those 6 were scored in the first half.
Fun second half there. Cougar Hoopsters overseas were good over the weekend. Brandon Davies, 27 points, 10 boards, 4 assists, and an 85-81 overtime win for Barcelona against Monaco. Kyle Collinsworth had 17 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, and a Seahorses Makawa 98-96 win last night in Japan. And Elijah Bryant signs a 2-year deal with Anadolu Efes, defending EuroLeague champs in Turkey. Congratulations to Elijah.
Absolutely. BYU baseball ties with Utah 6-6 in 12 innings in last Friday's fall exhibition in Salt Lake City. The Cougars will host the Utes at Miller Park this Saturday at 1 p.m. with free admission for fans. I will also have the radio call on BYU Radio.
And the AP preseason men's basketball top 25 was just released. Gonzaga number 1, shocking. BYU did receive 3 votes in the initial poll, puts them at 45th. So BYU is 45th in the top 25. BYU Hoops also announces Midnight Madness will be this Friday at the Marriott Center. Doors open at 10:15 local time. The event starts at 11. That's an event you and I don't go to because we're old and it's too late at night. All rise and shout. It's time for What's Trending.
You're talking about it, and so are we. It's What's Trending on BYU Sports Nation.
All right, let's talk it out. BYU's lost 2 in a row. Boise State and now Baylor, 38-24. 5-2 on the season. Okay, out of the top 25. From the top 10 to out of the top 25. What did we learn about this BYU team after 2 straight losses, Jason?
You will see a theme with a lot of mine. Not all of the points, but you will certainly see a theme.
Like Halloween themed? Or
sort of, but not, because I hate Halloween.
me and you.
Okay. Number 1, if BYU can't run the ball, it's going to be difficult to win.
Amen.
That has become more and more evident. And here are the numbers. The rushing yards that BYU has had for every game thus far. Against Arizona, 162. Against Utah, 193. Arizona State, 161. South Florida, 181. Utah State, 221. Thank you, Tyler Algier. And those were all 5 of the wins. The last 2 losses, now this is not significantly lower, but it is lower. Boise State, BYU ran for 140. Baylor, they ran for 67, and most of that came on a touchdown run from Jaron Hall of 56 yards.
Yep.
So the 2 lowest rushing yards in terms of, total yards per game
sub 160
is sub 150, and both have been losses. So if BYU cannot run the ball offensively, it's going to be difficult to win. Here's something else, and again, I told you a theme. When Jaron Hall runs, good things happen for the offense. We mentioned the 56-yard touchdown. It was on a 4th and 1 play, and he was wide open. It was a great read, and there was no chance anybody was catching him. That is such an important part of Jaron being the quarterback that when he still has the speed, so when he runs, good things happen. If you can run the ball, you can move the ball in the BYU defense. That is something else that I learned.
That's anybody. Yeah.
That's
not exclusive to BYU.
No, but I'm just saying that's something else we learned. It was reinforced that if you have a running attack right now, you're going to be able to move the ball on the defense. Here's something else. Puka Nacua is becoming BYU's best receiving target. Week in and week out, he is getting better and better and better. Now, let's also realize he's also getting healthier and healthier every week.
Hamstring's better.
His performance was absolutely phenomenal. This is another one. The Boise State loss is worse than we thought. Obviously, losing it was bad. But when they go home and lose to Air Force, and I understand Air Force is having a good year, Air Force has had other good seasons. They don't go up to Boise State and win on the blue turf.
Well, anyone
they did
can
this
win
week.
Up there now.
Well,
Nevada,
but that
Oklahoma
makes the loss to Boise State even worse. And then the last thing is the Big 12 is a step up in play. There's no question. But one game does not mean everything. I see all of these. Well, look, BYU lost to Baylor. That means they're not fit for the big. Stop it. It was a game.
I told you to stop going.
It happened to be against a Big 12 team. Let's not make sweeping judgments about BYU's fit in the Big 12 based on one game. Stop it.
Yeah, I think BYU should say no thanks because, no, of course not. Yeah, okay, those are some keen observations. A few for me. welcome to Power 5 football, where I'm not talking the Baylor game. I'm talking the amount of Power 5s BYU has stacked up, okay? You are going to lose some games. 2 weeks ago, I said I still felt like there were 2 losses on this schedule. I hate that I was right about that because I didn't see them in the next 2 weeks. I just thought they'd happen over the next 7. But here we are. BYU's knocked out of the top 25, okay? But BYU did a tremendous job when healthy at the beginning of the year to take care of business. I think we can point to one thing that massively changed the season. I suppose 2. Quarterback injuries. Jaron Hall's rib injury is a big freaking deal, okay? He rushed 8 times. 5 of those were sacks. 1 was the 4th and 1. 2 others were a rush. Jaron Hall's not inability, but his inability to, I guess, take hits and want to sustain hits with the ribs, which makes total sense, is tough for the BYU run game. You can load it up against Tyler Algier. Lopini Katoa did not have a carry, by the way, against Baylor after the 2 fumbles against Boise State. I imagine we'll see him against Washington State. Okay, that's tough. And Baylor Romney getting a concussion and being unavailable is effective as well. Last week I asked the question, would a healthy Baylor Romney be better than a better option than Jaron Hall if he can't run and take hits? I still think that might be a yes, but Baylor Romney's still not available. We'll see Saturday. Jaron Hall hasn't done anything to be unseated as the quarterback.
No, of course not.
I just think the run game is not as open, and when you're playing a talented defense like Baylor, and then Boise State was better than we thought on defense, that changed the game. If you're able to run the ball, even if you cough it up, maybe you still win that game, right? BYU was not going to beat Baylor in this game. Baylor was too good. This was different than Boise State, where it was self-inflicted turnovers.
Yes.
This was Baylor is a better team than BYU.
Yes.
And you move on, right? Welcome to the Big 12 as well. Welcome to Big 12 football. I don't have a massive issue with giving up 38 points to Baylor. I have an issue with BYU not keeping up on offense because, yes, on defense, play better. This is the Big 12. BYU's going to play games like that one where they have to score 40 to win, okay? That is a thing that is going to happen in the Big 12. That's the brand of ball. Like you said, it's not the Pac-12. I loved this tweet. I was literally LOLing hard. At Devin D33, we need another cupcake Pac-12 game. This wasn't the Pac-12, right? Where BYU could win against Arizona, Utah. Much improved with Cam Rising. Good thing he didn't start, right, against Utah, against BYU. And then Arizona State did their undisciplined thing again. Okay, 9-3 is in play. All good. I think BYU can still go 4-1 down the back 5.
Yes, of course they can.
I'm not saying 5-0 because I think there's still issues. And
but it's possible.
5s. Sure. Yes, every one of those games is winnable. If BYU finishes 9-3 in the regular season, tremendous. A chance at 10 in the bowl game, you'd probably be ranked to finish the season, and you would be preseason ranked probably with a returning quarterback. That would be awesome.
And I do expect them to go 4-1 at worst down the stretch.
At worst, okay.
I think it's 4-1 at worst.
3-2's at worst. I think 4-1's at best. I don't think 5-0 is probably. I think there's one game you're dropping there. Okay, 5-0 in the Pac-12 is still in play, by the way. 5-0 in the Pac-12 is still in play. I think that'd be fun. If BYU wins against USC, Pac-12 de facto champs. You're going to lose every year. Just a reminder, okay? When BYU sat at 5-0, it's like, oh, maybe that. No. When you play 7 Power 5, you ain't going undefeated. Sorry, did Alabama go undefeated this year? Is Clemson having an off year? We think BYU is equal to those programs right now. They are not. They're hoping to become that at some point in the future, some juggernaut. The reality is, if BYU can be a 9-win team as a Power 5 in the Big 12, that'd be tremendous. It just would. Okay, and then it is what it is. You lose some games. Paul Charrington, this was hilarious on Twitter. This probably means BYU won't win the national championship if BYU can't pull off the comeback. This is during the game. BYU's won the national championship every year we beat Baylor in football. We have never won the national championship when we haven't beaten Baylor.
Look,
that is a scientific fact.
There's nothing that we can dispute with that tweet. That is 100% fact.
I'm not okay with necessarily how the game played out. Although last week I was concerned on the show that this was a tough challenge and we did not meet it.
We knew this was going to be one of, if not the toughest game on the schedule.
Yes, I just didn't think BYU would give up 300 yards and couldn't stop.
Yeah, but look,
that was really disappointing.
I understand you can look back and say, well, if this happens and blah, you can play that game until you drive yourself insane. But let's not forget, in the second half, BYU was on its way in. It appears, certainly for points, it looked like a touchdown was probably coming, and then you have the hit on Jarom where he fumbles the ball.
You have joined the exclusive club of mixing my name with
Look, and I don't blame Jarom for that.
Yeah.
Because he could not see that.
You can blame me for that.
I will blame you for that.
Yeah.
But look, the defender was able to make a move on the right tackle.
Campbell Barrington had a few moments that were tough.
He had a few steps, and it was right into Jarom. If that drive continues like you thought it would, BYU's pulling within 3.
Yeah.
So, but that, I think, was what changed. Like when you go from almost being able to go to 3 and then not getting any points, they go down and score, it just kind of changes everything.
This is a game where BYU probably had to be plus 2 or 3 in meaningful moments and field position to be able to equalize in this. And you know what? Jeff Grimes won the Jeff Grimes Bowl. BYU's going to have plenty of shots at Baylor in the next couple of years.
Yes.
By the way, early rise shout out to the BYU fans who showed up at that game. Oh my gosh, we heard you. We heard you. It was amazing.
And Baylor was impressed.
Baylor was impressed.
Not the Baylor fans. You see people tweeting about how great it was, the fan response
and
from BYU.
And they rolled out the red carpet,
yes.
as Spencer talked about in countdown to kickoff, which was awesome. Very classy situation there, which was great. Our question of the day: what did we learn about this BYU team after 2 straight losses? Let's hear from you and Voice of the Nation.
This is the Voice of the Nation on BYU Sports Nation.
We ain't on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We go to the gram. The first response at juror.pet98. BYU still outperforming expectations, but we're gassed right now. If you told fans at the start of the season we'd be 5-2 at this point with a win over Utah, we'd be ecstatic. BYU still has the potential to win 9 to 10 games, but they need to get to this upcoming bye week to recover and reorient themselves. I agree with all that. But BYU didn't have time to reorient themselves. They got to play Washington State. They got to play Virginia.
Coming off of a win, a nice win.
Play Idaho State live on BYU TV. That's essentially, an FCS week is different, right? And then you have a bye week. Then you're Georgia Southern, who's already fired their coach, triple option. Then you have USC. So you can build to USC for, in theory, a couple of weeks emotionally.
All right, coming up. Look, nobody has been more pro Big 12 than me, yet I got snubbed by the Big 12, and this has to stop.
Come on, man. We'll show you what happened. And ESPN's Trevor Matich joins us. What now for 5-2 BYU? This is BYU Sports Nation.
My name is Spencer Finnegan. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. During my sophomore year, I got married to my sweetheart, Mary, and there's tons of unexpected expenses when it comes to marriage. We were looking for scholarships. I found the replenishment grant, and my local alumni chapter gave me a grant to help me focus in on school. I'm so excited to, now that I've graduated, give back to those students that are coming to BYU in the future.
Professor Rock here.
The Food Nanny.
Chandler Scott here.
Samry.
Hey, everyone.
Hello.
I just want to tell you about this amazing,
Excellent.
Cool account called My Style.
My Style checking. I'm talking travel points.
Gift card. Concert tickets.
All just for using my account.
That's My Style.
So check it out.
Give it a shot.
Open your My Style checking account today.
This organization is called Canes for Veterans. There's a man named Jamie Willis who makes these handcrafted, personalized canes for injured military veterans. I want to impress Jamie with my woodworking skills.
I did it.
He did mediocre.
I would love to make a perfect cane for a veteran who really needs it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
BYU Sports Nation is presented by the BYU Store, official outfitter of BYU fans everywhere.
Today on Coordinator's Corner, offensive coordinator Aaron Roderick and defensive coordinator Elisa Tuiaki join the show to recap the loss at Baylor and look ahead to the game at Wazoo. Catch it on the BYU TV app at 1 Eastern Time.
Lots to talk about. We're live in Studio B with your day-to-day BYU Sports play-by-play. I'm Jarom Jordan alongside Jason Shepard. Well, Trevor Matich of ESPN, former BYU Cougar, always joins us on Mondays. And earlier today, I talked to him about 5-2 BYU and what now. All right, Trev, lots to talk about with BYU and Baylor. Certainly 2 losses in a row for the Cougars. Cougar fans wondering, hey, what's going on the last 2 weeks? What are you seeing that is the common denominator of 2 losses in a row after a 5-0 start?
2 physical teams that pushed around the BYU defensive front. That's really what happened. I mean, the offense could have done more in both of those games. But against Boise, you had Jarom all coming back from his injury. And that was his first game back, and he wasn't quite himself. It needed the defense to step up, and the defense struggled. Jaron had a terrific game against Baylor by most accounts. There's a couple things that he missed, but overall, you can't really fault him at all. And the defense needed to step up and put a speed bump in front of Baylor. But the physicality of Boise and of Baylor back-to-back, given some of the injuries that BYU's defensive front has had to deal with, was too much for the Cougars to overcome.
303 yards rushing on the ground for Baylor, certainly a concern. Abram Smith goes for 188 himself, 6.4 yards per carry allowed. Where do you start defensively with BYU trying to slow down the run where Boise State hadn't run it effectively, did, and then Baylor comes in and rushes for 300 plus?
Yeah, it's hard to fix this, but you can point to a couple of things that they can do better. The one that's most fixable in the short term is to set the edge better. Too often, BYU's edge guys, the guys that had contain, got stuck on the middle of a guy trying to block him when they really need to keep their outside arm free, and they need to be more aggressive in driving upfield to set an edge to turn him back inside. That's not just a matter of, well, the other guy just blocked me. That's a matter of not handling those blocks on the edges as well as I know that they can do. The other is the defensive line needs to eat up blockers. Too often, especially with Baylor, offensive linemen would double team at the point of attack and then come off of that double team, one of them, and get on a linebacker at the second level, which, by the way, is exactly what BYU likes to do when they're rolling. And the D-line of the Cougars was not able to eat up 2 blocks. And so the linebackers, instead of being able to flow and attack like they do when they're at their best, they had to deal with 300-plus pound monsters coming to the second level before they could even think about coming off and making a tackle. So those 2 things, set the edge hard, aggressively, with correct technique, and the D linemen need to be dirt eaters and just eat up blockers so that the linebackers can flow, because the strength of this team is still the linebackers.
Let's talk about the offensive side of the ball. BYU's inability to run effectively the last 2 weeks feels like it was a preventer from competing maybe and winning those 2 games. Baylor, it feels like that's going to be a shootout that Baylor probably wins anyway, but BYU's got to run the ball more effectively. 2.8 yards per carry. Jaron Hall has a tremendous 4th-and-1 run for 56 yards, but besides that, BYU run game's not been able to get going the last 2 weeks. Yes, BYU does have 2 freshmen playing and some backups with injuries to Harris LaChance and others, but Cougars on offense kind of need to kickstart that. What are you seeing on the offensive side of the ball?
Well, you've got to give some credit to that Baylor defense, because they were really good at stopping the run. They focused on that. They knew exactly how to do it, and they did it. I mean, Tyler Algier had, 33 yards? I didn't think the Hoover Dam could hold Tyler Algier to 33 yards rushing, for goodness sake. And so I think that the thing they've got to do from the rushing attack is keep doing what they're doing, keep pounding it. And if the defense comes up and stuffs them, which Baylor did, you've got to go over the top. The thing about going over the top is that they need a little bit more consistency with what they were doing with the throw game. Again, it was really good from a number standpoint. They moved the ball. But if the defense is going to take something away, and if they're good enough to take something away, plan B has to be good enough. And it was to a degree. The thing is, BYU scored 24 points on Baylor, right? Only 2 teams scored more than 20 against Baylor this year so far. And that's Oklahoma State, who is undefeated right now and has a legitimate chance at the playoff. And then Iowa State, who was a team coming into the season that a lot of people thought were potential Big 12 championship contenders. And so those two teams scored 24 and 29 points. BYU scored 24 points. And so in some ways, you've got to give credit to that Baylor defense, because if you're not stuffing the ball, if you're not just pushing people around, you're not pushing people around. And you've got to go to plan B. And so the pass game did do well, but it wasn't the good pass plays that really mattered in this game. It was the things that weren't working. BYU, they scored from 4 drives. They threw the ball down the field. Jaron had that big run. But there were a whole bunch of 3-and-outs or 4-and-outs. And those are the kinds of things that you can't do, because those are drives that you need to do one of two things. You either need to get down and get points, or you at least need to get a couple of first downs so that you're driving the ball up the field, punting from a more advantageous position, and giving your defense a longer field to defend. And so these are things that the BYU offense has got to kind of look at. Teams that are good can limit your plan A. Plan B needs to be good enough to get it done. And for BYU, plan B is not just throwing, but it's being consistent enough to not have 3 or 4-and-out so often.
Yeah, and there were some catch-up yards and points there, given that BYU was down 3 scores. The game changed a little bit, but all good. When you look at the running attack, I feel like Jaron Hall's rib injury is being underplayed. He clearly is not going to carry the ball in the same way that he carried it against Utah and Arizona State. And Trevor, I would argue without Jaron Hall's legs, I'm not sure BYU wins those games. And then Baylor Romney's concussion plays a huge role here, because if Baylor Romney's healthy, maybe you don't have to play Jaron Hall in a state where one of his best attributes is taken away. I feel like that's a big deal that Jaron, yes, on 4th and 1 ran there. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like 8 or 9 carries where he's going to have 50 to 80 yards and affect the game. Baylor Romney hopefully can get healthy. Hopefully Jaron Hall can get healthy, and then BYU can be that team that beat Utah and Arizona State, because I don't think they have the full accoutrement of offensive options right now with those injuries to the quarterbacks.
They don't. And really, what team will succeed if that happens? What team at least will not struggle to succeed? And I wouldn't be surprised, I don't know this for a fact, but I wouldn't be surprised if the coaching staff told Jaron to not run as much as he would want to protect himself. And so that might have taken away some opportunities that he may have extended. He may have taken off and run, but he didn't, because he was told not to, because they can't afford to lose him right now again. And so these are things that also affect what he's doing. Will they call fewer potential quarterback runs? I think so. And I think the defense knew that. And so they got into the backfield and they sacked him a lot. They got after him a lot in the backfield. Most of that, I think, was on the offensive line, but Jaron could have absolutely affected that had he been more the runner that he was in the first part of the season. I don't mind that they are protecting him physically. I don't mind that he doesn't want to throw his body around right now, or at least it seems that he doesn't, in order to protect himself. That's what he kind of needs to do. But you're right, Jaron and Jarom. I'm now getting those conflated. You're right, Jarom, that his, I don't want to say inability, the fact that he didn't affect the game with his legs as much as he did earlier in the season was a big factor when you face a really good defense like Baylor.
Okay, Washington State this week, TBD on Nick Rolovich's situation, right, with the state of Washington and vaccinations and whatnot. Virginia, the Bronco Bowl, I'm calling it, the next week. Then to, Idaho State, bye week, Georgia Southern, you'd think those 2 wins. And then at USC. 5 games left, 5-2. I feel like there's probably 1 loss in there somewhere. Hopeful for 4-1. 5-0 feels aggressive given the last 2 weeks. How many regular season wins do you feel like BYU will end up with?
Well, right now it looks like 8 or 9, because like you said, if they play it out the way that you just described, that's about the way it'll turn out. And that's reasonable, because some of those opponents are really good. Washington State, for goodness sake, they've won their last 3 games in a row. All of them against Pac-12 teams that have had some big wins this year. They beat Cal. They beat Oregon State, who's had some big wins this year. If you haven't followed Oregon State, they're really looking good. And then they beat Stanford. And so that's the last 3 games for the Washington State Cougars. So this is a schedule that remains very tricky and very challenging for BYU. But I would say this for fans. I think fans were spoiled with BYU getting into the top 10 and undefeated so deep into the season. And if you would have said preseason that BYU was going to finish, say, 9-3 against this schedule, if you're a fan, what would you have said? I think most people would have said that's pretty good against this schedule, especially since you're replacing now Zach Wilson, an all-timer at quarterback. And so these are things that I think the expectations are the enemy of the success that they are having and can continue to have.
Yeah, absolutely. They were altered at 5-0 and number 10, right? And BYU is in the college football playoff conversation. I was saying, no. I felt like 2 weeks ago there were at least 2 losses on the schedule. I just didn't think they'd happen the next 2 weeks. So I agree with you. If BYU can go 9-3, aka 4-1 in the last 5, with a chance for 10 in a bowl game, you'd finish ranked probably, and you'd probably be preseason top 25 going into next year with a returning quarterback. Who knows if Tyler Allgeier's back, if he continues to have this success, although the last 2 weeks have been different. It's an important stretch here in going into the final year of independence, but the schedule's kind of tough, right? You got 3 P5s left. Washington State's looking better, so BYU's got to bring it, Trevor, because like you said, this isn't the schedule that BYU's typically played. There have been 7 Power 5s, but there's still a lot to play for. If BYU finishes 9-3 in the regular season, that's a tremendous season.
Sure it is. And Jaron, did you just say that you said a couple weeks ago that you saw 2 losses in the season?
I still felt like there were 2 losses in this schedule.
Did you say it out loud?
Yeah, on the show.
Did you say it out loud?
Yeah, on the show.
Yeah. And then they lost. Listen,
I'm not that powerful. I don't believe in jinxes. Come on, Trev.
Now listen, no, I don't either. I'm not superstitious. I think it's bad luck to be superstitious. Do the math on that one. But yeah, I think you might have jinxed them. Yeah, the thing is, though, now you look at it from the standpoint of the team, right? The team is looking at one game, Washington State. Is that a winnable game for BYU?
Yeah.
Yes. If they play up to their capabilities, they can win that game. Is Virginia a game they can win if they play up to their capabilities? Yes. If they stay healthy, if they practice perfectly, and I mean perfectly, every rep of every drill, every game is a winnable game. They could still finish 10-2. 9-3 would still be an outstanding season. 8-4 against this schedule would be respectable. And so, again, looking at it big picture, these are things that fans can look at. From a standpoint of what they've already accomplished, though, I think to date right now is really remarkable what they've been able to do. Having lost so many guys to the NFL and coming out against such a tough schedule early on and being able to get 5-0 in the top 10 from there. Attrition affected them after that. A little bit of making mistakes that they weren't accustomed to, especially the fumbles against Boise, affected them after that. But now they have a chance to reset and keep going. And for the fans, it's all about, hey, big picture, where can they end up when we look back at it in January? But for the team, it is one game. And it's not even one game. It is one drill in practice that they have to do at championship level. And it's not even the one drill. It's this rep in practice. And to stay focused like that is really exhausting. But that's what they need to do in order to finish out the way that they are capable of finishing out.
They really need a bye week, but it ain't coming for 3 weeks. They have to play 2 more Power 5s in a row. Okay, you have clamored for years. Hey, when you're a receiver, you got to go get it. You got to go get that ball. How about Puka Nacua on Saturday? 5 for 168 and a touchdown.
A man named Puka was absolutely the beast of the day for the BYU offense. He was fantastic. And Gunnar Romney had a good day. There was an Isaac Rex sighting, too. I couldn't believe that. I'm looking up going, oh, hey, they threw the ball to Isaac. That's nice. I'm glad they did that. But Puka, even running the ball, he had one of their longest runs, which isn't saying a lot in this game. But he has been largely uncoverable, and the Baylor defense actually praised him after the game, saying that he's a great athlete and a great player. And they're right. But I'll tell you this, when you get that kind of praise from your opponent, that's high praise, because your opponent doesn't have to praise you. A lot of times they just want to trash talk after they win, but they had praise for Puka. They also had praise, by the way, Baylor did now. Their players, not just their coaches, for the way that BYU conducted themselves with so much integrity and class. And they were very impressed with the culture of BYU that was apparent in the way that they played the game. And Baylor players came out and said that after the game. And I'll tell you what, that is high praise indeed. So you've got Puka being praised as an athlete. You've got the team in general being praised for their class. This BYU team is headed in the right direction.
Washington State and BYU coming up Saturday. Trevor, as always, you're not superstitious, maybe just a little stitious. We appreciate the time.
No, that's right. It's bad luck to be superstitious, yeah.
ESPN's Trevor Matich on BYU Sports Nation. Are you superstitious? Are you a jinx guy? You feel like you can jinx things?
Yes, I do. Even though realistically I realize that's not possible, logic tells you it's not possible. That doesn't keep me from worrying about it.
Greg Wrubell, anti-jinx guy. I am 95% anti-jinx guy. I think there's a little piece of me that
I don't believe in it, but just
in
in case, I don't do it.
Do you think it's my fault BYU's lost?
Oh, 100%. No. The last 2 losses squarely on your shoulders. It's no question about it.
Why am I burdened today?
All right, coming up is calling for a change at quarterback for BYU, an overreaction right now. We will discuss.
And did I encourage the aforementioned Greg Wrubell to commit theft in Waco? And did he? He did not. This is BYU Sports Nation.
If I got hurt and was laid up at home, I wouldn't even think to call a lawyer. What a hassle. I'd want to meet them first.
What if I told you that for your first consultation, your lawyer will come to you, home or hospital?
Really?
Really.
They do that?
If you've been injured, we'll come to you. It's your job to get better. It's our job to deal with the insurance companies.
Learn more at siegfriedandjensen.com.
Hi, Spencer Linton here, letting you know when your company joins the BYU team as a corporate partner, your brand can be featured in sports programming on BYU TV and BYU Radio. In addition to all of the great games, you can be part of the BYU coaches shows, place your message in Countdown to Kickoff, basketball pre- and post-game shows, and each weekday on BYU Sports Nation. We invite your team to join ours and become a corporate sponsor of BYU Athletics. For details, email sponsorship@byu.edu today.
I watch BYU TV because it has good programming for all family members, aligns to my values.
BYU TV really does help me with my parenting. It helps me show my kids good examples of the way that we should live.
No matter what you watch or listen, you always leave feeling better.
All of us together.
This portion of BYU Sports Nation is presented by Visible Supply Chain Management.
BYU football with Kalani Sitake airs tomorrow night on the BYU TV app. Join Greg Wrubell and the coach as they look back at the Baylor game and preview this week's battle between the Cougars. Tune in Tuesday night on the BYU TV app beginning at 8:30 Eastern and always on demand.
No, Cougars will win jokes this week, okay? We're just done with that. He is Jason. I'm Jarom. This is BYU Sports Nation. Don't forget, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok with BYU Sports Nation. Let's whip it. Cougar Whip Round, presented by Visible Supply Chain Management, tackling America's most challenging shipping problem.
All right. Greg Wrubell, the voice of the Cougars, tweeted out a picture of this sign in the visiting AD booth at Baylor. And Jarom, on Twitter, you weighed in asking Greg to, quote-unquote, steal this sign.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, let's be honest, the sign is pretty sweet.
Yeah.
What are the odds that Greg Wrubell brought that sign home?
No, I did talk to Greg this morning, and it's in my... no, just kidding. He said... No way. And he said that thing looked like it was like 200 pounds. Like, it was legit.
Yeah, that was not
like
something cheap.
Really well crafted.
Yes.
So they took time. It wasn't, cheap, which is pretty cool.
It's very cool. I asked him to put it in his carry-on and bring it home. That clearly didn't happen.
You also encouraged him to steal. Shout out to Carl Russell. Jarom, don't encourage Greg to break the community. It would have been borrowing. They would have given it back. Come on, man. Speaking of things seen in the Baylor press box, there's a long-standing tradition on our show not to include Jason's photo in the BYU Radio pregame promos. Looks like Baylor and the Big 12 are following suit. Jason, how do you feel about this?
Look, I would like to say that it was not immediately brought to my attention.
Look at this.
Okay, so here's this.
Visiting radio.
Yes, it's very cool. And if you look over to the left, there's a great shot of the BYU radio team. And guess who's not there?
Ben Bagley.
Yeah, let's zoom in on that. I see Mitch, I see Greg, I see Riley. Interesting. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give Baylor the benefit of the doubt because we did take some pictures that day of just the 3 of them because they're the traveling part. I do not travel with them.
Yeah.
I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that that was that picture. I am not going to give the benefit of the doubt to Ben Bagley, our producer, who has purposely told our students to crop me out of photos.
We only have so much space.
All right. Amy Jones, a.k.a. at Ames Flames on Twitter.
Big fan of the program.
May have been the real MVP on Saturday with her daughter Coco, who got pictures with multiple Cougar notables with her, quote, "I'm not Jaron Hall" sign. Amy tweeted the following: "I call this photo collection, will the real Jaron Hall please stand up? ESPN, you're welcome." Is this truly elite?
Oh, well, and she had Jaron Hall.
Which is the best.
I'm Jaron Hall, yeah, which is awesome. This is great. She had Tijan Karoma and Micah Simon and Reno Mahe and Jack DeMooney. I love that Jack acts and dresses like he's still a player on the team. I love that energy, honestly.
Well, earlier in the day, he was in his swim trunks at the pool.
Yep. It was awesome. I love it. No, that's elite. That is.
There's no question it's elite. And I love that this has continued to gain steam like every week on the road. Like this could turn into a really fun thing for the rest of the year.
The West Coast Conference begins the season as the top-ranked non-power 6 in basketball at 6 with the Big East conference in college hoops, according to KenPom.com. What does this mean for BYU hoops?
Nothing. I mean, like,
this has never happened. They've never been ranked this high in KenPom.
But I mean, you still have to go out and win games. What does it mean today?
No, you win in the preseason.
You're getting some recognition. That's great. But like, what does it mean for BYU hoops?
We hang a banner.
Today right now doesn't mean anything for anybody in the WCC.
Top non-P6 conference. We're hanging a banner in the Marriott Center. What are you talking about? This doesn't mean anything. You're right. No, it's nice. Mark Pope is acting like there might be a non-Big 3 team that might make the NCAA tournament finally this year. That would be a big deal.
Yes.
If that, well, it doesn't have to be that. It can be more top 100 teams, right? If you can have like 6 in the top 100, now that helps BYU's net, which has been incredible the last 2 years.
All right, Jim McMahon posted some photos of his grandsons who dressed up for the Bears-Packers game yesterday. Did they already win Halloween with this? The answer is yes.
I think they own Halloween like Aaron Rodgers owns the Bears, okay? This was great. This is amazing.
Look,
Jim McMahon's grandkids are hilarious.
I as much as I like the grandson that is dressed like Jim, the one dressed like Mike Ditka is the best.
What if it's
that is the best?
What if the Hurricanes named Mike Ditka? Said SNL. That's awesome, man. Good stuff.
That is fantastic. All right, coming up, the prop pick results.
And could Puka Nacua become the best receiver at BYU ever? Overreaction, underreaction, including should BYU consider starting Baylor Romney if he's healthy over Jaron Hall? We'll discuss. This is BYU Sports Nation.
They prefer to be bringing the heat, getting set for success, demonstrating their drive. But when their blood and sweat turns to tears or anything else, we lay the groundwork for BYU's athletes to hit the ground running again, and you as well. Intermountain Healthcare, official medical provider for BYU Athletics.
Tim Daly Ford in Spanish Fork offers a large inventory of Ford vehicles, including a selection of cars and trucks, providing a range of transportation choices. From the Ford Fusion sedan and the Edge crossover SUV to a range of pickups including the F-150. Each product line comes with options to enhance performance, comfort, and safety. Think Ford, think Tim Daly Ford in Spanish Fork.
I know what it's like to be overlooked, to be doubted, to fly under the radar. I only had one offer coming out of high school, but I was ready for every moment, every opportunity, and every shot that I got. Now I'm playing professional basketball, aiming to be one of the best shooters on the planet. And I'm just getting started. Be ready for your moment with Rapid Reboot, the future of rapid recovery.
Hey family, if you're looking for something new to watch, stop scrolling and start streaming. BYU TV has a ton of great options to binge together. From bold adventure to family drama and even a little fun. There's something for everyone. Binge entire series, experience all the feels, immerse in non-stop intrigue, and treat yourself to unexpected turns. Think you know BYU TV? We're just getting started.
BYU Sports Nation is presented by the BYU Store, official outfitter of BYU fans everywhere.
After further reviews the Baylor game this week, watch as Dave McCann, Blaine Fowler, and David Nixon break down the film AFR, available tomorrow on the BYU TV app at 7 Eastern.
Nice interception by Peyton Wilgar on second drive from Baylor to prevent points. That was good. I wish he had kept up like that. Welcome back to BYU Sports Nation live from Studio B. Okay, 2 losses in a row. A lot of conversation, a lot of reaction, some overreaction, some underreaction, probably right. Let's take a look at these in a segment we call Overreaction, Underreaction Monday, presented by BYU Food to Go, the MVP of your next event. Let's bring in the voice of BYU Sports Nation, the coordinating producer. He's in charge here, Ben Bagley, to present the first topic.
All right, first comment. BYU should consider starting Baylor Romney over Jaron Hall.
Now, this is an interesting one. Jaron's played really well the last, 2 weeks, I would say. Obviously, he has an interception last week and yet threw for a career-high 345, right? But the Baylor Romney thing's interesting. I said last week, if Baylor Romney's healthy and Jaron isn't with the ribs and can't run and take hits, he can run, but I mean take hits, is Baylor Romney a better option? It's a question that I think needs to be figured out. Baylor Romney has been a G5 killer, right? He hasn't started against Power 5 team. That would be a new venture for Baylor. I think he's ready for it if he's back from a concussion. But there's no reason to bench Jaron right now. The people that want to bench Jaron, I don't think understand what's going on. In fact, we had something pretty special on Saturday, which brings us to our stat of the day.
It's the BYU Sports Nation stat of the day.
Courtesy of BYU Statsman, Jaron Hall had 4 passes of 45-plus Saturday in the loss to Baylor. Only 4 other quarterbacks at BYU have ever done that. John Walsh, John Beck, Robbie Bosco, Steve Sarkisian. The explosiveness is there.
Yes.
Yes, there were some, as I mentioned to Trevor, catch-up points and yards when you're behind 17. You're doing that, right? But I don't think Jaron Hall should be benched. He hasn't done anything to deserve to be benched. I just think you ought to consider bringing Baylor in if something happened against Washington State where you're not as effective as you need to be, and maybe Baylor's arm is a difference.
Okay, but that's the role of a backup. That's every game. If something happens or the starter's not doing what the offense needs, that's what the backup quarterback does.
And I just argued for Jaron's arm.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. There is no reason to not start Jaron Hall right now. There is not. So in terms of just simply the question, should BYU consider starting Baylor over Jaron? The answer is no. I mean, Jaron is the starter. The coaches have all said.
What has he done to not deserve?
Exactly. He's done nothing.
And
he's done nothing to deserve to not be the starter.
Yes, and if you put Baylor Romney in, is he going to be a better passer than Jaron? I think overall, like getting the ball out, spreading it out, blah blah blah. I think yes, but Jaron Hall has grown as a deep ball passer. Granted, some of these throws are underthrown, but they're being caught. He's good. He's a good player. He's a really good downfield passer right now. I think he's grown a lot. We've seen some explosiveness. Obviously, Puka Nacua had his breakout game on Saturday. So there's no reason not to start Jaron Hall. I just would love if Baylor Romney is ready that, hey, if things aren't going well, maybe that's an option. But Jaron Hall hasn't deserved to be benched.
No, he absolutely should continue to be the starter. And I was so happy to see the run that ultimately went for a touchdown. Because, yep, still there.
It's still there.
It's still there.
I'm not saying he can't run. It's just the contact.
Yes.
He went down quick and, awkward one time when someone was coming over. It's he still can't get hit. It's obvious. It's a rib injury. That's going to linger all season.
Jaron is the starter.
Be tough to do.
I expect that to be the same moving forward, as it should be.
Okay, number 2.
Offensive line depth is a concern.
And so we didn't declare overreaction, underreaction.
Yeah.
That was an overreaction, the previous
Correct,
segment.
Overreaction, yes.
What's your reaction now?
I agree with this. I think it is
reaction.
It is a reaction. This is a legit reaction. And I did not expect it to be. And I understand that BYU's been without some starters, and in the game at Baylor, they were down two starters. I get it, but I did not expect. With all of the depth that we've seen at that position in terms of guys that have been able to play over the last couple of seasons, I I thought it was a plug and play. And so the fact that there has been some drop off, that surprises me. So right now, I think it is a concern that there has been somewhat of a drop off on the offensive line.
Note the difference in BYU against Utah State with 3 backups playing. Utah State's one thing. Boise State and even Baylor are another. BYU played with Connor Payne, Campbell Barrington as those backups playing. Campbell Barrington's going to be a good player according to Aaron Roderick, but he's young, right? So yeah, it's a concern. Need to play better, but you just played arguably the best or second best team on the schedule, Baylor. So I'm not gonna rate it against Utah State or Baylor. I throw out the high and the low, if you will.
Yeah.
What BYU does against Washington State, that'll be a better indicator. We'll see. Number 3.
BYU has to run the ball well to win.
Yeah. BYU's right now, BYU has to run the ball effectively and be positive in turnover margin to win. That's what it feels like. Against Washington State, I think there will be some running lanes. I don't think it'll be as big of an issue as it was against Baylor.
Yeah, I mean, I said this in our trending segment. BYU is going to have to run the ball, and we've seen the stats bear it out that in the wins, they've had a significant increase in rushing yards for the game. In the 2 losses, they have been down, and the performance against Baylor was the lowest rushing total of the season by a long margin.
Yeah.
And
a lot of that has to do with the fact that BYU's down.
Yeah, yes, and there were a lot of
catching
there were
up,
sacks
passing,
that took a lot of some of the yards away, but still, he wasn't going to come close to what Baylor was doing.
Right.
There was going to be a massive discrepancy between the 2 rushing attacks.
Jaron Hall lost 42 yards in sacks.
But yes, BYU has to. It's such a weapon when you have a guy like Tyler Algier. When he's not getting at least 100, at the very least. Having a guy like having a guy like Tyler Algier opens things up for Jaron Hall in the passing game.
And look at those numbers, right? The yards per rush down 2.4 difference, right? The carries similar number, but the yards per game way lower for Tyler Algier. I expect Tyler Algier to have a big game Saturday. Honestly, I think he'll have a 100-yard game. I really do. I think Washington
I would expect
State's
it. Yes,
defense is not the same as Baylor or even Boise State.
I expect 100 yards or more every game from him. That's why it's been surprising that it hasn't happened in the last 2.
I did not against Baylor.
I still did.
Tougher.
They had given up rushing yards, even though they'd won 5 of 6 at the time. Teams had run on them. This was the first time it had not happened.
Yeah, BYU needs to be able to run. So that's a fair reaction. Okay, number 4.
Last one. Puka Nacua may be the best receiver ever at BYU.
Okay, today it's an overreaction. He's just starting his career. Ask me this question in a couple of years because he may be on that track. He is that good.
Yeah,
he is
2 or 3
that good.
years
Today
left.
It's an overreaction. In a year or 2, it may not be.
Who's your GOAT, by the way, receiver at BYU?
Oh, man.
I have one.
Probably Collie.
Yeah, it's Collie.
Yeah, Collie. Your guy Pitta, maybe? You want to say Dennis?
Not talking tight ends, talking wide receivers.
Yeah, it's Collie right now.
He could be all time. I don't think he's going to pass Austin. Austin was like a 1,515 touchdown year, number 1 in the country yards per game. That was next level in 08. He goes early. Puka could approximate that. I just think Austin will have sort of 3 years of. Let's see how long Puka's here too.
That's true.
This year, he could go. Let's say he explodes the last.
You're right.
Part of the season. He could bounce if he wanted. Hopefully he'd stay here. He has a COVID year. He's technically a redshirt sophomore he wants to be. He could be here this +2. We'll see.
He's the type of talent that is in a conversation like that.
We're putting him in the conversation.
Yes.
After a couple of games.
Yes.
He has a 5 for 168, and we're like, is he the GOAT?
He is phenomenal, and he's getting better week after week.
Awesome.
All right, coming up, Baylor, they were nice.
Not Remy. And I'm up 1 in prop picks. Did I stay there? We'll recap it. This is BYU Sports Nation.
This portion of BYU Sports Nation is presented by BYU Food to Go, the MVP of your next event.
Trio Orem Senior Living believes in empowering seniors to live life to the fullest. We help eliminate stress out of daily life when you live at Trio. Less time focusing on housework means you can socialize at one of our many events, with safety in mind, of course. And did we mention our spacious apartments with modern amenities? Learn more about setting up a private tour at trioorem.com.
when we sit down to watch TV. It's a fun way to unite your family, be entertained, and to watch what's on BYU TV.
Brings our family together. We all love BYU TV.
If you are watching it with your family, you will have a good time and you can reconnect and you can bond with your family and have a better relationship with them.
All of us together.
Let's kick off AFR on BYU TV.
What they did in that fourth quarter was not unexpected in my book.
Everyone did their job perfectly, and it resulted in, obviously, a touchdown.
Who knew that he had these kind of hands?
And right at the snap of the football, they both go right downhill. And that was the end of that. He knocked him down pretty quickly.
This portion of BYU Sports Nation is presented by Mountain America, the official credit union of BYU Athletics.
BYU Sports Nation is always available on demand via the free BYU TV and BYU Radio app.
Or download the podcast. All you need to do, Google BYU Sports Nation podcast. Don't forget, subscribe, rate, and review the show.
Prop picks, recap. Number one, who will be responsible for the 11th point scored by BYU? It was Jaron Hall running for a touchdown. I specifically said Jaron Hall rush. I'm surprised I did that. So I get the point.
Congratulations to you. We're all so happy for you.
Thank you.
All right, number two, number of Ryan Rico punts and BYU passing TDs combined. Well, Ryan Rico had 4 punts. Jaron Hall threw 1 touchdown pass to the aforementioned Puka Nacua. Nacua gave BYU a total of 5 punts and touchdown passes combined, which happens to be the number that I picked.
Very nice.
So I get a point. I am the winner with 5.
Number 3, how many rushing yards will Jaron Hall have? He rushed for 6-7, lost 42, so net of 25. And you picked 24, Jason. Congratulations. You win, so you get that. The standings are as follows. I have 2. Spencer has 1 win. Brian has 1 win, and you have 1 win. We skipped Utah week, and we have.
Didn't I get 2 wins there?
It's you won the overall. You won 2-1 for 1 single win.
Well, that seems ridiculous.
Welcome to the show. Our elite voice of the day, presented by Sundance Mountain Resort. Not related to the question today, but it is the elite voice. Tasha Lynn, 19. The beginning of BYUSN gave me PTSD. I cracked my collarbone at my high school graduation party when I got hit by a rogue golf ball on the mini golf course. Watch out, Shep. What?
There it is. There it is, right here.
That's crazy.
I need to go up to HR. I need to fill out that workers' comp form.
Oh my gosh.
When we're done with this show.
I know who threw it. Today's Rise and Shoutouts are presented by Mountain America, the official credit union of BYU Athletics, despite the loss. The way Baylor treated BYU was awesome. President Kevin J. Worthen and Thomas F. Homo were in the parade, which is awesome, in the morning. And then they just really welcomed BYU with open arms, which is super cool.
And it was awesome. Even though it was unnecessary, they took out all the caffeinated beverages out of the press box.
They did?
They did.
It's not a thing, Baylor. We're good.
But it was the gesture. It was not needed, but the gesture.
Just kidding.
No.
And women's volleyball and soccer take care of that. Thanks to today's guest, Trevor Matich.
Conversation continues 24/7 on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Use hashtag BYUSN.
For Jason, I'm Jarom. Shout out to Vic Soto. Stay tuned. Coordinator's Corner, Aaron Roderick, Greg Rubel coming up on the app. Go Cougs. Oh! Shep taking one in the collarbone.